Hail, it's your boy Jamal here, you know, the one from Daily Japanese Thread on 4channel. Oh, you have no idea what that is? Well, no matter, lol. Anyway, it's time to talk about a very important subject that should be relatively common sense, but here in the English-speaking Japanese learning community is most certainly not, as common sense comes at quite the hefty premium, haha. Pausing. So what's the deal with this pausing thing, and why does it matter to me, the Nihongo hopeful, you may ask? Well, recently I've noticed that there's some lesser IQ individuals, 90 to 110, out there on the vast open internet frontier who find it is good practice to spend upwards of 60 minutes, some people even 90 minutes. Wow, to complete a 20-minute episode of anime or whatever, lol. This is just Oroka at the side-eye level. If you had to mouse over or otherwise look up those two words, then perfect, this is the article you need to be reading most right now. So look, hey race, an important part of language acquisition that often gets overlooked by people who just have to look up every single word 100% of the time. Spoken Japanese needs to be heard in its natural flow at its natural speed 100% of the time. I'm gonna repeat this again with really big letters and underline and bold and shit to emphasize its importance, or whatever. Spoken Japanese needs to be heard in its natural flow, at its natural speed 100% of the time. Okay, so hopefully you read that thing, cause if you didn't then you're fucked forever. Heaven, you sky, I'm looking at you. Anyway, the idea here is when you're watching a program on the telly, you need to watch it as it is presented. That means no slowing the speed down or raising it, you fucking sickos. That means no pausing in between utterances to look up some words you don't know, cause your Japanese is absolute dogshit because you keep trying to learn everything instead of just sit back and acquire like a true language acquiring Chad. You need to just watch the program and enjoy. That means especially preserving the flow and progression of the scenes themselves and the conversation/monologues therein. Maybe you can and should look a couple things up afterward if your goldfish brain has the capacity to remember things in the short term. But in the moment you're not allowed to. If you're talking to a thug-ass ninja on the mean streets of Southside Kawasaki, do you think he's gonna be like "Aya mabetsu and I kamo on keto" as you interject that you need to look up what he's saying as he's trying to tell your malodorous honky ass to go back to your country? I don't think so. You need to take the verbal, spoken language at its natural pace without breaking its flow. You know how if you're trying to take a piss, and you manually clamp your pisser shut, it's very uncomfortable and possibly a bit painful to do midstream? Yeah, that's basically what these people are doing to their Japanese acquisition stream. The pain isn't felt immediately, it's felt when years later your Japanese is still absolute trash. Pausing is detrimental because it ruins the act of human communication itself, which has many more intangibles than just words themselves in a vacuum, and these intangibles aid comprehensibility greatly. You probably take them for granted, never noticing them in your native language, but they are most certainly there. Oh my god, why does this guy write like this? What's his problem? So if pausing telly programs is out of the question, then you may be wondering, but Jamalsama, how do I understand the Terabibangumas? Well, there's only one way to understand them, and that is if the input is comprehensible in real time. That means there needs to be some way for you to understand the messages as they are sent. If you know Japanese, then you will just understand them on the count of knowing Japanese, haha. But for the rest of you it gets a bit trickier. Of course, your strongest way is with subtitles in your native language, going to assume English here. Now I know some of you lower IQ people out there in language learning La La Land might think there's something wrong with subtitles, but there's not. Because the spoken language is Japanese, and that's what you should be hearing, at native speed with no interruptions. The subtitles are there only to help you get the message from the Japanese you heard. It's very important to understand this does not mean actively breaking down the Japanese and trying to decipher it to fit what the subtitles say. This is another pitfall that plagues the foolish and lesser IQ. You don't need to actively try to do anything, but just listen the best you can and enjoy what you're watching. Remember, this is entertainment, not study hall. You can study whatever foolish shit you do at another time, but when you're watching the telly, it's most certainly time to just have a good time and enjoy the program. Pausing as it relates to media other than TV/radio or real-life conversation. So one question that lower mid-tier IQs, 115-120, tend to ask is how is reading while consulting a dictionary not pausing, or how are playing visual novels and looking things up not pausing? Well, it's very simple. Books aren't dictated to you, you have to do the reading. If someone else that's native reads them to you, then you are not allowed pause them as they are reading at natural speed, because you have tread back into the spoken language that you must be hearing in its natural flow at its natural speed 100% of the time. However, if it's you that's doing the reading, you are not native, and are thus immune to this rule. Yay for epic loopholes! Jubilations! LOL. Well, not so fast, your Japanese is complete shit, never forget this. As a result, in trying to read, the most important thing is to select material appropriate for your reading level as best you can. If you can't read or understand most of what you're reading, please just try something else until you find something better. I tend to recommend ehans and manga with furigana for the young budding readers. You can even find nice ladies reading ehans aloud just like your mother would on YouTube. This is good stuff for emerging readers. As it relates to visual novels, first of all, basically visual novels are for Japanese adults. This means a lot of teenagers will be reading them too. So if you're not as good as a Japanese teenager, then visual novels are not a great point of entry for you. Simple as. People still want to beat their head against the wall on this, because they want to believe there's some magic to visual novels, and I don't blame them. It's just you're gonna spend a lot of time, and get very little out of it for a long time. It'll pay off someday though, as I was there circa 2003. Oh yeah, so the pausing thing. So pausing doesn't really happen in visual novels, because they also aren't exactly dictated to you. Yeah, there are spoken lines, and they play at native speed, spoken at native flow, but you still have to progress the scene yourself unless you use the auto-read function, which I find doesn't really restore solid flow, mainly due to the visual novel medium itself. That means it's very much up to the player, or reader as it were, to dictate the pace on their own. That means you are again immune to the rule thanks to the loophole mentioned above. Check your privilege, LOL. The only thing they don't control are the spoken lines, that when the clip plays it's at native speed and at natural flow. You'd have to go very far out of your way to fuck with that, so in my professional opinion, as an esteemed Nihongalogist, you can't really pause visual novels. They are just picture books with sound clips and some elevator music in the background, LOL. Again, I don't recommend these if you think Cheese Sweet Home says Cheese Sweet Home. Final thoughts. Don't spend more than the program's runtime watching the program. That's really it. If you want to examine it more in depth afterward and spend hours on it, that's fine, but you at least need that first run through to be completely at native speed and preserve native flow of conversation. Not doing so stifles your acquisition of Japanese greatly. If the majority of your TV programs are input in such a butchered and stifled way, you will never acquire Japanese, especially if you don't communicate with Japanese people regularly. Also, for the love of God, if you decide to take an episode after you've watched it and break it down and strew its innards all over the place, please don't do autistic things like try to memorize the TV show's dialogue. The shit some of you fuckheads out there do is seriously mental illness, so much so that it makes this blog post seem sane and normal. Anyway, see you next time, turds. Maybe I should make a Twitter or some shit so some of you knuckleheads can at me your stupid shit that I will berate you for in the public forum. Otherwise you can find me on boards.4channel.org/jp/djt chillin' with the boys. Your boy Jamal.